I'm joined by five esteemed experts here that will help me to find some answers to this question during the panel today. And I'd like to start first by introducing all the panelists and give them a few sentences and minutes to introduce what they're doing in the area of 5G trials, what are the use cases they're looking at, and what their role are in making this work. Please, Dan.
Okay, my name's Dan Warren. I'm the head of 5G research at Samsung UK. And in addition to that, I'm also the chairman of the 5G PPP steering board. And in addition to that, I'm one of the lead contributors into the 5G Vini project, which is one of the Horizon 2020 funded ICT 17 projects. 5G Vini is building a number of test facilities around Europe in association with mobile operators. And Samsung, we are building a test facility at BT's labs in Martlesham. The test facility is interesting in its own right, but part of the purpose of the ICT 17 call was to build test facilities for vertical industries to come in with via ICT 19 funding and build vertical use cases. Start to deliver testing over the next 2 to 3 years of practical implementations of vertical use cases, interesting services, which are going to operate over 5G networks for now and the future.
Thank you very much. Darko.
My name is Darko Ratka. I work for the European Broadcasting Union, the EBU. And the EBU, you may know, is an association of public service broadcasters. And what we do in the department where I work is we are looking at the technology development and scouting, in a way, the technologies that might find an application in both production as well as distribution of audiovisual media. So our interest in 5G, in fact, is twofold. One is we would like to see how can that technology be used in the content production. And the other thing is we would like to see how this technology can be used in content distribution. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Gail, please.
So I'm Gail Sedou. I'm head of research for immersive technologies at Technicolor. So Technicolor, a new partner with InterDigital. I look after technologies such as augmented reality, mixed reality, even extreme reality, which is another R. Also VR and light field. So light field technologies are implementing a new way to promote content using point clouds or volumetric video. So I do that, and we are mainly looking into the real-time out of those technologies because telepresence or even entertainment needs real time. That's it, basically.
Good, thank you. Monique.
My name is Monique Calisti. I'm the director of Martel Innovate. It's an SME. It's based in Switzerland, and we are involved for several years now in the 5G context in Europe in several projects. We are working with InterDigital, with Dirk, and with other partners on trialing 5G-based services in the media content domain. And we are testing now these technologies in 2 cities in Europe, in Bristol and in Barcelona here. I'm involved also in other activities within the European 5G PPP initiatives, helping the community to gather and grow around, in fact, a number of trials that are happening in Europe. And I'll be happy to tell you more about this.
Thank you. Jim.
Yep. Hi, Jim Burgess. I work for Bristol City Council, and I'm their program lead for 5G tourism. The 5G tourism is broken into 2 halves. One is user experience, which the BBC and several other partners, there's 29 partners in total, did the visuals for in Bath. And we were asked to do visitor safety in the Bristol area. From a council point of view, safety is extremely important. And having been involved with the operations and previously, I was aware of some issues that we could address. So we took those forward, and yeah, we've had some good success, which I'll tell you about just now. And thanks for the invite. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Great. So I want to get the discussion going by starting to look first at the use cases. We talk a lot about trials. We talk a lot about 5G. 5G has these really interesting words like EMBB for enhanced mobile broadband, for ultra-reliable low latency. But at the end of the day, it boils down to use cases. What is really driving 5G? What is driving the trials that we currently see in Gale? I was wondering, you mentioned all these new forms of media distribution, media content that can be consumed by end users. Do you see this being one of the drivers for testing out how 5G can really help you there?
Yes, definitely. The amount of data that are generated when you capture real, either using a light field setup, meaning it's only a bunch of images or stream of images plus a depth image to reconstruct the volumetric out of those videos, is really in demand of a large bandwidth, low latency, and an amount of data that has to gather through the network. When you are reconstructing a mesh with a texture, so using videogrammetry, for example, which is another aspect or technology aspect that you can use if you want to represent human beings or a scene or a sequence or whatever. You are in demands of compressing the point cloud, compressing the mesh, compressing the texture. So it's a load of data, it's complex, and you want to be very accurate, and the high fidelity is very demanding. And then on the rendering side, on the at the very end of the pipeline, you want to render with interactivity, and you want, for example, if you are in an immersive experience such as VR experience, you don't want any latency. You want to have a frame rate that is close to 90 frames per second, and you want accuracy, fidelity, so a high resolution image that are maybe 16K for a 360 type of use case. So both at the beginning and at the end of the pipeline, you are in demand of transporting, compressing. For example, we've been working for a while on compression of point cloud, and it's quite complex because huge amount of data, millions of points, and you want to keep the accuracy of the lighting, for example. You want to keep the accuracy of the fidelity of each pixel and the relation between those pixels. And it's no longer a 2D segment, it's a 3D space. So compressing that is quite a challenge. So we are now moving into the standard, inside the MPEG standard, for both point cloud compression, using also the legacy H.266 format. And yeah, it's a big challenge. But eventually, at the end, what you want is the presence, the notion of immersiveness. And so the accuracy of the data that's been transported, the accuracy of rebuilding the data. For example, we're working on a format called volumetric format. Basically what it does, it's capturing a scene in volumetric. So you have the parallax, you have the sensation of the space, and then we are compressing that and coding that into 2D streams of image using H.266 or HEVC. And then so it's using the legacy broadcast format. And then at the end, in the rendering device, either on the device or both in the cloud and in the device, so that edge computing is very important at that point. You are rendering it again, the content, using metadata that have been transported inside the 2D image stream and the image stream itself, and reconstructing a volumetric scene that had been captured, formatted through the network, and re-decompress as a volumetric semantic scene. So that's an interesting point. Using the legacy network, using H.266 or HEVC compression scheme, but still having the metadata that transport the information about the volumetric.
Great. So, Jim, you mentioned public safety. Do you think the public safety use cases are the ones that are driving adoption of 5G in smart cities, for instance, or in cities like Bristol?
Well, use cases in general, I think as 5G progresses, we're doing technology use cases and technology trials. We need commercially sustainable use cases. So, when you come to the council, as everyone knows, councils don't have money anymore. Every year we have less and less. So I'm interested in when 5G technology comes to us, what can it do for the council? In our case, we used it very successfully in public safety, and I can talk about it in a minute. Not just to do a trial, but we actually extended that further where I'm going to have to find a service to run on the back of this once we've finished. So yeah, we've taken the technology use cases and actually molded them into a solution which can go to become a service, to become live. So yes, it's very important.
So, Dan, you must have seen a number of use cases in the various trials that are currently being set up for ICT in ICT 17 and 19. Is it mainly focused really on video and the type of very rich environments, or what's the range of use cases you're seeing there?
So the range is very broad. One of the things that we put in place in 5G Vini was a kind of a pre-approval process for ICT 19s when they expressed interest in participating in extending their use cases onto our test labs. And in doing that, it gave us a feel for the kind of KPIs, the kind of SLAs that vertical industries were going to look for. And they do fall down into two main areas, one being very high bandwidth, and when very high bandwidth is a component, it's very often video that drives that. And then also very low latency, where the latency is around criticality of the information which is being provided. I think what we'll see as we move into practical implementation outside of test trials is also a very high dependency on reliability of the network. And when you're working in a test facility environment, reliability is actually one of the things which is kind of difficult to prove out, because you can be 100% available between 9 and 5 when the lights are on in the test lab, but after 5 o'clock everybody goes home and all the network gets turned off, and you can't really tell whether you can do 24/7 reliability in a test facility which is only available for 6 or 7 hours a day. But when it comes to the breadth of industries, I think one of the things that's surprised us is that it's very broad. So there are some people around emergency services, and I think that again, ultra reliable, low latency, and high reliability kick in with that in the longer term. Video is certainly a very significant part, and the post and pre-production side, which I guess we're going to hear more about in a moment with XCast, that being extended into a distribution, potentially using things like drones as a capture or a broadcast model, or to provide network coverage. But right at the very outset, a lot of consumer potential around using a very high bandwidth connection as a front haul to some secondary distribution seems to be playing in, and I think that's also a reflection of the fact that regardless of where we stand at the moment, the big problem is devices. A 5G device is a rare thing. There have been a few launched around World Congress this week, but as we move into trials, specialized vertical integrated 5G devices are going to become a fundamental stumbling block. So you can only connect a car for a V2X demo if you have a 5G connected car.
From a use case perspective, Darko, how is the broadcasting industry looking at 5G? Excited or a little bit more sober?
Well, I used to say we are cautiously optimistic, but we have to be convinced that the 5G can actually address all the use cases we are looking at. So in the distribution, because that was mentioned now, Dan mentioned the 5G XCast. 5G XCast is a 5G PPP phase 2 project, which looks at a point-to-multipoint distribution within or over 5G. Now, I'm not here to advertise for 5G XCast or so, but maybe to explain why do we think we need point-to-multipoint. Cellular is great, unicast is great as long as you have it. Now, one of the issues we have, I think, as a society, but in particular also as companies that are trying to deliver video or audiovisual media services over a mobile network, is the lack of coverage in rural areas. It's also a very uneven coverage of a mobile network. Now, how can we address that? So as long as we are talking on-demand content, obviously everybody will receive what they want, and it can only be done largely, can only be done by unicast. But if you're talking the most popular content, which usually comes from live sports, this is where the mobile network operators actually suffer most, because this is what generates peaks in their traffic. For us, this is not necessarily a problem that there is a peak in network, the traffic peak in a network. For us, this is a cost issue, because the more popular your content is, the more it costs you. So you may in the end be a victim of your own success. So the question we pose to ourselves is how can we actually mitigate the cost while maintaining the reach, while maintaining the coverage? And we believe that multicast and ultimately broadcast is the way to go, not alone obviously, but in a dynamic combination with the unicast. And this is precisely what 5G XCast is all about. Yeah? So can I say something about content production?
Absolutely.
Okay. So now, for the audience here, I'm aware that we are also being streamed, but for the audience here, just pay attention to all the cables around the cameras. Now, I shouldn't have said that, but each and every one of us has got a couple of cables around us, about us. And this is in order to guarantee that there will be audio and video captured and delivered. Now, cables are complicated. They are dangerous. You can trip over. I'm not joking. The cost of insurance for a high-profile actor depends on whether there are cables on the stage or not, right? Anyway, so what if we were to actually have a technology that can do all of this wireless? Yeah? So 5G is an obvious candidate. We are looking into that. But back to what Dan has just said, where do we actually find a device that we can attach to the camera that can use the 5G capability and we can try it? So far we haven't actually found one, but we are hoping.
So I don't know if you've seen on the Mobile World Live screens, but Mobile World Live at Mobile World Congress this year have got a camera outside of their studio. And every time they use that camera, a little logo appears on the screen which says, and this is a terrible plug, I'm afraid, but it says broadcast over Samsung 5G.
Very good.
So if you find that camera, at the top of the stand, there's a Samsung CPE, and about 20 meters across the way, there's a Samsung antenna. So we're using our 5G technology with Mobile World Live this year to do exactly that. So the camera is capturing video and audio. It all gets transmitted across an air interface. It's a very rudimentary trial, but it is a 5G link. And then that goes back into a 5G core, which is in their studio and integrates into their production suite. Next year, we're already talking about what we do next. And we have some association with XCast as well. We're very interested in looking at what we can do on that production side to enable more cameras, to enable wireless headsets, to put in place a fully integrated solution which takes fibers and connectivity out of the production capability. And the last piece of this anecdote for you, I got a panicked phone call on Friday because I've been helping set up that demo. The panicked phone call on Friday was they said, we think we've got a problem. The whole network has stopped working. And I was going, oh no, this is not a good sign. It's because one of our engineers had trodden on a fiber and broken it. So it's nothing to do with the radio. It was the physical fragility of the fiber which caused the problem.
Things happen.
So I wanted to change tack a little bit from the use cases to the sustainability and adoption. Jim, you mentioned that sustainable use cases really, what's important. If you want to bring 5G and the various use cases into real life, in particular in the new areas that we see, smart cities, new environments, citizen engagement, we need sustainability. Do you feel that the trials, in particular the ones that are happening at the moment in Bristol, are helping you in that task to really convince councils to invest in 5G or at least being interested in?
Yeah, can I explain a little bit what the setup is? And so we, as I said, we started looking at safety in a safety use case. So what can we really do to adopt 5G for the end user? Two areas, water safety and event safety. So the first one, so to do that, we use some University of Bristol millimeter wave equipment, use Zeta Networks doing bandwidth slicing, ourselves, Bio provided some technical support to the council. So we're really trying to emulate a proper 5G environment. And the reason we needed that was we needed to, when you're going around the harbour side, and Bristol harbour side is quite extensive, you have to reach areas where you can't get fibre. And you need, it might be for a short period of time, might be for an extended period of time. It has to be high bandwidth, because we're doing analytics over here. And the important thing for us is it has to be low latency and guaranteed. Because if an event happens, you need to see it, and you can't miss it on your analytics. So we deployed a 5G network, looking simple things, barrier lines, virtual barrier lines down the side of the harbour side. And within 36 hours, somebody walked straight off the harbour into the water. it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they may have been having a happy day, shall we say. So immediately, I mean, the interest in this developed so quickly. We've had television coverage, we've had press coverage, we've had radio coverage. So we've gone from an environment where we didn't even know if we could do this to one where the fire chief for Avon and Somerset district has now said he needs this in place in about 20 areas across the harbour side. So the adoption has been very good, and the council think it's fantastic. But we've also developed use cases for events. So event issues, often in places where not easy to get communications to. Use 4G, all works the day before. 20,000 people pitch up, nothing works. What we're hoping with 5G, again with the same features of guaranteed bandwidth and latency, is to be able to pop up an environment. And I think Zeta are actually here today, this week, and they've got an example of it there. And pop up an environment where we can deploy safety features. So it's a terrible world we live in, detecting unauthorized vehicles before they arrive at an environment. Simple things such as when you have an event, you have no-go areas. So anywhere there's gas, so we have a balloon fiesta, there's lots of gas. Anywhere you have generators, and behind the beer tent where all the kids try and go. Areas you can cordon off and protect, and use analytics just to give you an awareness of when something has happened. And as we've developed this, we've now got the actual events people building with us to say, no, one of the biggest problems we face is transport information. We need to see information coming in from the external environment, and they've never been able to do this with traditional communications. So we've gone from in sort of June last year, we've got some problems, can 5G help, to we can fix these problems, and how do we create a service now which we can sustain. So as usual with the council, trying to find somebody who will actually pay for it, because there's no money to pay for it, but we can't let this drop. It's just too important for the city. We lose, 18 months ago we lost about 6 people in the harbour. We've had 6 issues this year, some have been fatal already. So, no, not this year, sorry, in the last 6 months since the trial started. We can't let it go. So the adoption has been fantastic, it really has. It's been really good to see we can take a technology which is brand new and immediately turn it into something which creates massive benefit for a city. So yeah, it's been fantastic.
So in these trials we see a lot of, either we see technology-driven trials, which we've seen over the last 1 or 2 years popping up, all over Europe and all over the world, or we have the showcase-led ones, like the ones that are happening in Bristol or in other places. Are there any other ways to engage with end users, in particular get end users or get the new application developers we are so keen on involved? And I wonder, Monique, in the efforts you're involved in, you've taken a very different approach in how to actually get the adoption being, picked up through communities, and maybe you can tell us more what you're doing.
Yes. So first of all, I think that we are assisting to an incredible growth of 5G trials. According to the European Commission 5G Observatory, by the end of 2018, we had 139 trials in Europe across 23 countries. And in particular, 5G trials in 35 cities across 14 different countries in Europe. So this is clearly showing that there is an increasing uptake of 5G concept and technologies. Of course, there must be an whole ecosystem revolution, because indeed the adoption of these technologies has implications that are going beyond pure technologies. There's regulation aspects that are different in Europe, country by country. There's implications also at the level of installation of infrastructural aspects, so antennas. There's been quite different situations depending on the countries. In Switzerland, for instance, we had some slowdown in deployments or in trials because of some referendum that was run in particular to identify what could be the problems related to proliferation of antennas for health of people. So I think there are, in fact, a number of issues that we still need to face, and that probably Europe is very good position to understand, because we have a culture of regulation, because we have a culture of inclusion and of engagement. In several of the projects that I'm involved in, we have trials, we have funding that is made available via, let's say, pretty agile mechanisms to get on board SMEs, to get on board startups or researchers to trial up not only technologies, but really to help understanding what are the critical factors for acceptance and adoption of these technologies. So in particular now working with Bristol and Barcelona with our FLAME project, one of the key things is how we engage the local communities in testing and validating 5G-based services. So I think there's a lot of open questions. We started answering some of them, but there's a lot of work to do.
Jim, yeah.
Just to back Monique on the health side, one of my biggest challenges is I probably get 3 freedom of information requests a week on health and how 5G can affect. Now we have papers by Public Health England. We have international committees who look at the issues around transmitted spectrum, how it affects people, what manufacturers have to do to comply with this international regulation to ensure it's safe. But it is still an area where people still think, although we know, or as technologists, the higher the spectrum theoretically, the less it should penetrate people. There's still a great deal of worry out there that, they always ask, what are we doing with handsets? Well, we're not doing anything with handsets. We're using 5G in a different way. So it's less likely to have an impact, but it really is an area which people continually ask us about. So if anyone's doing trials, it's always worth being prepared up front to get your information, to have stuff to hand out to people. And of course, in our case, because it involves cameras, make sure there's information below them telling you what they're doing, because that's the secondary concern. Are you invading my privacy?
So you're looking at a trial more as a way to engage with the public in order to make them understand what 5G can bring to them and address some of their concerns? Is that where you're coming from?
There's not much choice because they're really coming at us asking about this, which is good. It also helps us spread the success we're having. And once it goes on television, then that number of requests increase because obviously a lot more people are aware of it.
Okay, very good. Dan, I mean, I know that 5G Vini has their engagement methods with the various ecosystem players. So how is 5G Vini coping with getting everybody on board in order to do a trial? You mentioned there's a board type of mechanism.
Yeah, so we have an external stakeholder board, which InterDigital are a member of, and what we've tried to do with that stakeholder board is go outside of the traditional Horizon 2020 players and engage directly with industry verticals. So we have people like Bosch, we have the Norwegian military, we have a number of people who can bring their requirements to us in a raw form, and we often, I think, within telecoms get lost in our own jargon. We talk about our own KPIs and our own SLAs, and when you actually go and talk to vertical industries about what it is that they want, they often don't have a real perspective or understanding about what bandwidth or what latency. They just want some KPIs that they can measure against. And I think the interesting challenge we're going to face in the future when this is productized is that they also have an expectation of what they get back from you if you fail to deliver against the SLAs and the KPIs, and it becomes much more contractual. But in doing what we've done with Vini, we're now starting to understand where verticals actually see value and how to capitalize on that value and how to monetize it for both the telecoms industry and the verticals themselves, and start to generate some genuine good ideas around what the value add is for the ecosystem as a whole. Within Vini, we have a work package which is looking specifically at the economic imperative around 5G. And that is starting to generate some really interesting concepts around what business models might look like for 5G, which is another whole area which, you know, we've been playing with the idea and talking about the possibilities. Now we do need to start to understand exactly how a business case stacks up, and I think that's one of the big challenges with 5G, because the investment is really significant. The level of infrastructure, the level of bandwidth that is going to be generated, all has to be backhauled, and we can't just do that anymore in the industry on a field of dreams kind of build it and they will come model.
I want to expand on the last part. Trials usually are meant to showcase, to have big events. They are great things, in particular when connected to Olympics, or I think in Europe we are planning the Euro 2020 next year. But you mentioned challenges, and these trials must provide some insight into the challenges. 5G is still an area that is very unclear to certain people in terms of uptake, but also technological challenges. What are some of the insights you have and challenges, Darko, one from the broadcast industry side?
So broadcasters have been engaged in a number of trials around Europe and beyond, but at least my insight is more within Europe. And as I mentioned before, the issues we are trying to verify is how far can we rely on 5G and similar. I mean, 4G and 5G, that we don't really make a big distinction. Perhaps that's right, perhaps it's wrong, but we don't really see a big distinction with 4G developing and then new radio coming along and the 5G core coming along. We believe that this will be somehow, they will operate in a combination. Now, where can we use this type of technology? Where the value can be generated, as I think Dan put it very aptly. And what we noticed, what we realized is that in order to stage a trial, you have to obviously set up some kind of criteria, some kind of set of requirements you want to test against. Sometimes, KPIs you want to validate. It is unclear where are those. Are those the requirements that we have that come out of the service? Effectively our service requirements that are met by alternative technologies, by legacy technologies, or are there requirements that are of future services that currently are not possible? The 5G might enable.
Yeah.
So we so far effectively we stayed with the former. We said, well, this is what we can do with a technology, being it terrestrial television, satellite television, or production technology, or whatever. Can we do the same with 5G? Now, this is a very early stage, but we wanted to verify what cannot be done. And another motivator, another reason why broadcasters are engaged in these kind of trials is to understand the technology to the point they can influence the developments. Because 5G is still in the process of being specified, in the process of being developed. So what can we contribute to this process in order that the future releases, the future variants of these technologies, in fact, do meet our requirements?
So is the broadcast industry directly feeding into the current standardization efforts? I know the 3GPP has a very clear effort in Release 16 at the moment.
Yes, indeed. So I could talk for a long time about what we're trying to do and why and with whom we are working and so on, but I think it's a bit outside of the context here. Coming back to your earlier question, what are the challenges? So I already mentioned the challenge of actually finding the right equipment, especially the user equipment. Another challenge we realized is that in order to stage a wireless trial, you need a spectrum. Where do you do it? In which part of spectrum you actually carry out the trial? And then for a broadcaster, for a media company, 5G is a connectivity level, how do I put it? It's a technology that enables carrying large throughput, large amount of data under certain conditions. We don't get excited, our content people don't get excited about gigabits a second or milliseconds of latency or anything like that. So in order to actually demonstrate the value of that technology, you need to have an application that will illustrate that. Now, in a trial that is directed, say, towards decision makers or towards creative people or even towards general public, what is the application you can actually have, you can show that captures the attention, that can't be done over, say, Wi-Fi. So we realized there is a challenge, in fact, in devising and in developing an application that would demand this type of performance and at the same time illustrate the impact, you know, towards the decision makers. Anyway, I'll stop here.
Monique.
One of the key points that I think it's a little bit maybe under debated, according to my experience, is that one of the challenges is to define the right business models. And to define the right business models is not an easy deal, especially because 5G aims to serve across different verticals that indeed are very different in terms of needs. So we're talking about Industry 4.0, but you already know that it's probably the last vertical or one of the last ones that will possibly adopt 5G. So what is the business case, the winning business case per vertical? Probably is one of the core questions to pass from early deployments to adoption. And there's a lot also of implications at the legal and financial level that we are not yet in the position to understand. Plus, all the investments on 4G and on previous technologies are there to be amortized in a way or in another. So we know that there's going to be hybrid scenarios for quite a while. And whether big IoT, big data scenarios will be the killing applications or not, it's still something we need to understand on a, in my opinion, on a vertical per vertical situation, because the implications are totally different. I mean, think about a driverless car in the street. What are the implications? While you have a more media content scenario where the point is to get the video experience to everybody. I mean, it's a totally different, and there are so much different stakes also from insurer, liability, that it's very hard to predict as of today.
Gail.
And I think the scenario that you describe with multi-user accessing the same kind of content and maybe sharing the same content in a seamless experience is something that in mobility is happening more and more. So people, for example, in the media industry, want to have everywhere, whatever content, the content they want, so they're gonna find it, stream it, and have it on mobility. So maybe start in the home on their display and then continue with their tablet or their phone, go into the car, continue the experience, maybe as a passenger, and then later on share with other people a sports event. So the Wi-Fi cannot deliver that, because you would have to cover such a big and huge area that the 5G really is a promise that's going to solve it. So it's very important to understand that the content that the people want to share and want to listen to or view is really something that the 5G can deliver.
Then, yeah.
The challenge with what you just said is it becomes a circuitous argument, right? So I fully agree with you when it comes to the service proposition that you're describing in terms of the volume of content and how 5G can enable that. But when you talk about 5G solving coverage, that's not a technological challenge, that's an investment challenge. And it comes straight back to the business model, right? So you end up in this difficult, circuitous argument where people say, well, if we can have the same service everywhere, that'll be brilliant. But at the moment, networks get built on a business case per cell basis. And if you want to put coverage in a place where 2 people go for 3 hours a day, that's not going to happen, because it costs a lot of money to put a base station there to cover those 2 people, to power it, to feed it, to maintain it. What 5G does offer as a promise is a lower barrier to entry to cover places that haven't been covered previously on a business case basis. Because there is this separation now between hardware and software, and the capability to use much more in the way of a generic hardware to build networks, we're beginning to see that actually filter through into vendor roadmap. The work which we've done with Vinny, to bring it back to Vinny again, I've been genuinely shocked at what my technical guys are telling me we're going to do. When I got the high-level design the first time, it had a whole bunch of servers from a specific server vendor, which were very expensive. And I kind of went, oh, well, I don't really want to carry that kind of cost. Can we see if we can source those elsewhere or use something different? And when we got the message back, it was, well, we only chose those because that's what we've worked with, but you can use another server or you can use a lower capacity. Everything is much more flexible, much more topologically flexible and much more dynamic in the way that the network is built and provisioned because it's software-based. And the net result of that is the business case to cover areas where coverage has been more difficult or more difficult to justify becomes easier. That helps catalyze use cases which generate more revenue, which then allows you to justify coverage in more places again. The difficult part with all of that is exactly what we've all been saying. The use cases are arriving in a very bottom-up way in a network which is being described top-down. So somebody who wants to connect 50 connected ambulances in a very specific geography, that's a really hard thing to do. And people who want to connect connected stethoscopes, which were a thing about 5 years ago, it's in the same field, but it's a different company that wants to do it with a different business model. And once you have to begin to have a much more consolidated view in the way that business cases are going to be generated, which requires a very different structure in the business departments within operators and within vertical industries. So we have a very long way to go. This is something which is outside of the trials kind of discussion, because trials, people will come and do exciting and interesting things for fun. You get a bunch of technical geeks in a room and you'll find a whole bunch of things you can do by bolting things together. When it comes to commercialization, you need dedicated devices which are specialized and which can make use of 5G capabilities, and it will be a very long time before we get those in those bottom-up use cases where the scale is relatively low.
So there is a phase after the trial, which is called the pilot, and I really wonder if there is a role for a lot of the deployment insights you've been giving so far on this panel have to do with commercialization, with uptake, with the regulatory challenges. Now, is a trial, or should a trial always be limited to technology only, or should we move to trials, to pilots that do specifically cover the non-technological aspects of taking this up? This doesn't mean to make a commercialization case. This is not about turning this into a commercial product, but addressing certain aspects of where various concerns of stakeholders are addressed in a particular setting. The outcome of it might be failure. I know we don't like doing failure stuff, but failures are insights, right? Is that a role for trials at the moment where we are at 5G?
So the funding from central government now is becoming dictated more and more in the UK around a sustainable business model that you have to develop, or at least start suggesting to. So there was a big funding allocation just recently for towards 100 million potentially, but that has to come with a robust business model that they can stand behind. So it is changing, and I think you're right. The step is now is we found something which works technically. It looks good. Can we put it into a pilot phase and say in a pilot phase, can we prove that if we scale this out, it'll actually have a business model which sustains itself? So it's becoming much more of a requirement now.
And I fundamentally agree with that point. And the key difference between previous generations and 5G is that from the outset, it has been justified on opening the door to business and business to consumer use business models. So you could justify building a 4G network on the basis that 3.5G had seeded a desire from consumers to watch video on small devices. 4G delivered that in a far more robust fashion, delivered higher capacity. It's enabled 4K video to be delivered to small screens. 5G, it can't work just on a consumer business model. A lot of the focus is on eMBBB, but that's because that's easy to do. 5G has to have a B2B element to it, and because it has to have a B2B element in it, operators have to be cognizant of the fact that B2B customers, they are always the first B, and so their price is the cost for the second B in their business model, and they're going to be squeezed on it. So price sensitivity becomes a fundamental part of everything we have to do, because if it isn't, it will fail. It will end up missing the B2B opportunity, and B2Bs will do exactly what over-the-top content providers have done, and use an infrastructure which is built without a business model on the basis of B2B addressing, and go straight over the top and derive all the content and all the value themselves.
If I may, about engagement of users from trial to pilots, I think it's unavoidable, especially when we think that there are a lot of implications in verticals that are totally unknown, because the scenarios that we're trying to serve are totally new scenarios. And there's not only a problem of acceptance, but there's really a problem of verifying feasibility, first of all, verifying that the promise of 5G can deliver in terms of performance, but also in terms of, let's say, value creation, value proposition. Why would I invest? And it comes back to the discussion we had before. What's the cost of investing to have a 5G coverage versus the benefits, versus the value that you create? And the value can be something intangible that goes beyond economic benefits. And that's why we have to engage users, we have to engage adopters of these technologies to validate where the value comes from.
So we have to wrap up the panel, and I would like to have every panelist close with a question about, an answer to the question that 5G trials are really giving us insight into 5G happening soon, maybe next year, or maybe the year after. But what are the insights you're seeing in all these efforts that really maybe push us beyond what we're going to see? That's the beyond 5G word. Are trials helping us in that at all, or is this really about making the now happen? And we just go around until the end.
You want me to start?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have labs in Korea that have been working on 6G for 2 years. I don't like to say that too much because I think the hype here this week about 5G is dangerous in itself, and to start talking about 6G at this stage is really hard. But there's a number of things which 5G attempted to do which were pushed out of standards, which will come back. There is a desire to push into terahertz radio. There's a desire to commoditize Li-Fi. And there's certainly a further trend around moving out of a function-based network to a service-based network in the core. So there's opportunity.
So for us, we are still at the phase of, at the stage of actually trying to understand what is the potential and where can it be used. And it ought to be more than just delivering moving pictures to a mobile phone. Now, where is it? We can all have our opinion, but I think as a sector, there is no clear vision as to where the 5G would fit. And I think we ought to work on that. So we don't expect 5G to be massively adopted for video, for television viewing, if you like, or television production over, well, next couple of years. It might take a little while.
So working on a future technology which is to be delivering the digital double of yourself, meaning we will populate Earth with 7 billion digital self. That's the purpose. So it implements a lot of volumetric, it implements a lot of AI to animate those digital doubles. But what's going to happen is you will end up with a world, well, that's futuristic, where you will have relationship between real human and digital human. So we need pipes to enable that. So 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever, there will always be not enough.
So I think the vision that we're trying to pursue is the one of smart connectivity, whether it's called 5G, 6G, or beyond terahertz. I think we need more and more connectivity to be smart, meaning to serve different needs the society has. The society is so much digital that we cannot avoid to have more powerful networks and communication as a backbone of this digitally connected society. But I think we need more intelligence, and not necessarily on the digital side. I think we have to re-educate humans to critical adoption of technologies.
We're further removed from technology development being in the council, but we're closer to the citizen. So we're probably going to look at baking 5G solutions into some of the stuff that we do for citizens now. But we're also part of the ecosystem getting 5G out into the field. You mentioned high speeds, high frequencies, less coverage. So as your coverage goes down, you've got to find places to put antennas and masts. Local authorities should be helping operators find those locations and deploy in those locations, because it's a critical part of what they do. So that's where we are. Yeah, we'll be more involved with baking 5G. We'll be looking at 6G when we see it being released.
Good. With that, I want to thank all the panelists for the interesting discussion, and the plug towards Beyond 5G, well, I can use as a plug for tomorrow's panel, where we can talk more about Beyond 5G with different panelists, a different moderator. Thank you all. Thank for the online viewers. Thanks.